Hey guys, Brandon with Flyin Miata back for another FM Live. Today we have a very exciting one. We have been waiting an unreasonably long amount of time for this. The butterflies are back in stock, new and improved as well. So we launched this a while ago, and frankly we really struggled with production. Partially production, partially quality issues that we dealt with internally, so you guys didn't have to. But point being, we've changed to a new supplier, and the first shipment is here, and they look awesome. As always, if you guys have questions, please drop them in the comments. We'll get to them live if we can. Otherwise, we'll get to them afterwards. So, new butterfly braces. So I will go over kind of what they are first off. So these are braces for the NA and NB Miatas. So these bolt underneath the car. We'll show them to you in a sec there. But basically, they really increase the stiffness of the chassis. So one thing to kind of make clear, stiff chassis does not equal stiff ride. Stiff chassis equals as solid of a chunk as possible for the suspension to work off of. So your chassis is not an undamped spring that's kind of wobbling around. It's a solid thing that the things that move and are supposed to move, such as springs and control arms and such, are moving accordingly, and what they are attached to is not moving. That's the theory there. That's why you want the stiffest chassis possible. So these butterfly braces work with our frame rails. They work with the version 2 frame rails, not the earlier ones. They can work with the earlier ones if you have a welder. So the easy answer, typically, just get a new set. Excuse me. And they make a huge difference to how stiff the car is. They do have provisions for a flat under tray. We don't have that available yet. There are some issues to be aware of with that, and I'll kind of touch on that later. And yeah, they're the easiest thing in the world to bolt on. So these are a pretty big improvement versus our old ones. We'll look under the car real quick here, because they bolt on here. So the frame rails are bolted very solidly to the chassis, obviously, and are a big benefit on their own. And then these are bolted solidly to that. They're also bolted to the front subframe here. So with our old one, it was kind of folded sheet metal here, which was strong and made a difference, but it was a much more complicated setup. You also have basically a pivot here where that right angle of sheet metal can kind of do this. So better than nothing, absolutely. Nowhere near as strong as these guys. The other part of it was it had kind of a center section here that was removable, so you could get the transmission out and that kind of thing. But it was a headache to get to. These, you can see the bolt heads are right there, super easily accessible. So this will take you 3 seconds with an impact to snap it off. Your fuel and brake lines are very well protected with this setup. The bolt heads are mostly recessed into this plate here. And then again, it has holes so that you can bolt a flat under tray on there if you want. We did play with that. In our testing at this point, the transmission tunnel gets pretty warm. So you need to make sure that you're evacuating the air out of there. If you have hood louvers, that kind of thing, you'd probably be okay, because at least all the heat from up here can go out there. Otherwise, it's got to come out here, and if it can't because of the under tray, then you have a little bit of an issue. So anyway, you can see how it bolts on. Absolutely as easy as possible. For the V1 frame rails, the reason they don't work is that we have weld nuts in the frame rails here to mount these guys to, and the triangles don't line up right. So you would have to fill in the hole and then put a weld nut in there, and then you could use your V1 frame rail. So if you want to do that, awesome, more power to you. But this is probably going to be much easier. So, oh, and then tons of room for exhaust. Sorry, I forgot to point that out while we were under there, but take my word for it. Lots of room for exhaust. So it's really a pretty straightforward thing. The big deal now is that they are in stock. I will warn you, they are moving extremely quickly. I do not anticipate them being in stock for very long. We have more on order. So we will be getting more, but it'll probably be a few months before we actually get those. So, okay, we got a bunch of questions on this one. So I'm going to jump right into that. How does the weight of this butterfly brace compare to the NB Sport bracing? That's a good question. We haven't done that test yet, but we will. I'm going to guess that it is roughly comparable to possibly slightly lighter. A qualifier on that is that this requires our frame rails, and the stock bracing obviously does not. So, but if you take this as a complete kit with the frame rails and compare that weight, well, then you're getting more stiffness. So it's not really an apples to apples thing. I think the really short version is that whatever the weight is, I wouldn't move to these for weight savings from your NB Sport setup. I would move to these for better performance, stiffer setup. It's just a stronger platform than the stock stuff is. So, which is a good segue into the next question. Are these more effective than the stock NB bracing? I already have frame rails and stock bracing. Are these really a worthy and effective upgrade? I would say yes. Now, that said, if you have a 90, which is the flimsiest Miata made, and you're considering these, it's going to be a much bigger upgrade on the 90 than it would be on a 2005 that already has the stock bracing. So do I recommend these? Yes. Is it as critical for a later car, later NB like that, as it is for an earlier car? No, it's not. You know, is it better? Yes, I think it is. Is it enough better? How big of a deal is, you know, the money to you is kind of the question there. So, any issues with exhaust clearance with the butterfly compared to stock braces? No, you'll have more clearance with this guy, with one exception. So right here, particularly on the 1.6 cars, but kind of on any of them, it's going to be close to the downpipe. The stock 1.6 downpipe, for whatever reason, dips quite low. So you will almost definitely have to cut off the heat shielding. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with your stock downpipes, but basically there's a pipe and then there's a metal shell on the outside for that heat shielding, and you're going to have to cut a section of that out so it doesn't hit here. So you will have to do that. Outside of that, no, you've got tons of clearance everywhere, and you can see we kind of located it just right so that you've got room on that resonator there. It was between the different exhaust setups and the different generations and all that kind of stuff, we had to really play with a location here. There are also recesses in the stock frame rails for the weld nuts so that you don't have to drill into the frame rails to mount these guys. You do obviously have to drill into the chassis, but you don't have to drill into the frame rails at all. All the clearance that we need for all of these, all this hardware is already there. So. Okay, how does the stiffness of the OEM bracing compare to just frame rails, no butterfly, with the butterfly? So it kind of the same question as before. I will say that the frame rails make a good difference. These make a huge difference, and you can absolutely tell seat of the pants whether the butterfly brace is on the car or not. This is our development car, so we're always futzing with it, and lots of times we'll leave the butterfly off because why would we put stuff back on and off, even though it is crazy easy to do. And you can absolutely tell a difference. Seat of the pants, it's pretty impressive. Okay, what improvements have been made over the last version? So really the biggest improvement is the supplier and the fact that the parts are right when they show up, and they show up on time and all of that fun stuff. So that's the biggest thing. They're actually available. That said, we did make some changes to make manufacturing easier, which means better quality control, which means lower prices, which means actually having them in stock, and so on and so forth. On the front one here, it's a pretty simple change. We just changed this big plate, so the weld lengths were shorter, so there's going to be less warping possible. On the rear, we kind of did the same thing. So with these big tabs to keep those weld lengths short, but we also, we had some fun with it. So we made these little cutouts, partially for weight savings, partially because they look cool. And then the original one had a brace here that did exactly nothing for the strength of the brace. in terms of when it was installed, but it did make it easier for a previous supplier to manufacture them. This supplier doesn't. So, and yeah, having just done QC on all of these, the success rate was dramatically higher. So, so this is a little bit of a weird one, I guess. What is the total range of adjustment if adding to a set of previously installed frame rails? So I think what that's saying is I put my frame rails in without the butterfly brace. How do I know that my frame rails are in the right place and these butterflies will still bolt up to it? So the biggest thing with the V2 frame rails is, like I was saying, with the weld nuts that are back here, they go into recesses in the frame rail that you, I don't know if you can get in there with a camera or not, Travis, but you can kind of sort of see, yeah, right there's the light, oh, down a little bit, but there's a hole there. So, and that's a pretty tight hole, really. So as long as you line up with that hole, which you kind of have to install them properly, they'll be in the right place. That said, there is a fair amount of tolerance. You can see these are slotted this way, and then the diameter is a little big this way. So you do have a bit of slop in there to make sure that stuff gets installed properly and will fit on your car. So I can't guarantee that they'll work if you put your frame rails on, but without these, but the likelihood is quite high. So, what is the loss of ground clearance? Will these scrape? Can the braces shear off when sliding curbs? So the loss of ground clearance depends on your car. If you have a sport car, you're not really going to lose any ground clearance. Between these bolt heads here, and then the later cars have a big brace here, and I think it dips down here as well. So it's going to be pretty equitable, I would say, to that. If you have a 1990, then you're going to lose about that much ground clearance. So let's see, what was the second question here? Will these scrape? Sure, you're driving a Miata. It's absolutely possible to make them scrape. They are closer to the wheels, so you're, breakover wise, you're going to hit here, which is actually a good reason to have our frame rails with stainless steel. They're stronger and more likely to slide across. And if you scrape them, they're not going to rust and all that fun stuff. Is it possible for these to scrape? Sure, it's absolutely possible. Will they shear off? I mean, I think you'd have to try, but anything's possible. If you hit it with enough speed and everything is arranged just right, sure, but you'd have to try. We've had this set, well, maybe not this set because it's brand new, but we've had this style, the V2 butterfly brace on this car for a couple of years, since the beginning. And we've had no issues with it since we started selling these. I want to say we've had 1 or 2 people that hit a manhole that was sticking up real high or something like that, and had an issue. So possible, sure, likely, I would say no. Okay, when installing the rails and braces, is it best to have the chassis weight supported naturally on the suspension or on stands at the pinch welds? Good question. So basically what they're saying is, will the chassis flex to the point where the dimensions are going to be slightly different if I support it this way versus if I support it that way? In a static position like that, I don't think the chassis is going to flex enough to make a huge difference, so I think you'll be fine either way. If we want to be really picky about it, it should be on the wheels, because that's the position that the car will be in during use. That said, we've done every butterfly install with the car supported like this, and we've never had any issues with anything. So, I have the old FM frame rails. Will these braces work with them? Again, this is actually an old style brace that we happen to have right here. So basically, the holes for these guys drop in the middle of one of the triangles, or a few of the triangles. I can't remember if it's all 3 per brace or not, but basically you'd have to weld a strip of metal in there and then put a weld nut in that. So it is possible for them to work, but it requires a welder, and I'd probably just buy new frame rails. But it's your call. It is possible if you want to invest that time in it. If you're paying somebody else to do it, hard no. do new frame rails because the labor is going to be way more, and you're not going to end up with as clean of a product anyway. So, or I mean, I guess technically quite as strong, but pretty close. Okay, can I buy frame rails now and upgrade to the butterfly brace later? Absolutely. They're both going to be around for the foreseeable future. And again, as long as you follow the instructions, the frame rails are going to be pretty precisely located in the first place. So the likelihood of getting the location wrong so these don't line up in the future is very, very low. I mean, it's as long as you follow the instructions, as always, it's basically nil. So that's no problem at all. Can I use the butterfly brace as a jack point? Oh boy. Yes, if you are lifting here, which really is using the frame rail as a jacking point. If you want to put the jack in the middle, no way. We haven't tried it, but I would absolutely not recommend it. These are very strong in tension like that. Once you start to put a load in the middle, because it's kind of a long lever arm from basically where the frame rail ends to wherever you put the jack, and it's lifting up, 1,000 whatever pounds. So I would absolutely not recommend that. Yeah. When will these be available? That is the exciting thing. I can say right now, as long as you're watching this live. So they are available right now. We have sold a ton of them already in just the day and a half that they've been available. So if you are considering them, I would suggest that you jump on it right now. We will be getting more. So if you miss out, it's okay. You just got to wait for the next shipment, which should be here in a few months. But I do anticipate going out of stock on these, unfortunately. Will this reduce how squeaky my Miata is? They should. I can't guarantee that because I don't know where your squeaks are coming from. But generally speaking, yes, the stiffer your chassis, the less the squeaks and rattles and general annoyance. The car will also just feel much more solid. You can kind of feel things moving, whether you know it or not. And lots of times it's kind of one of those, you don't know it until it's missing. And then, oh, this is the difference. This is amazing kind of thing. So there is an extremely high likelihood that this will reduce how squeaky your Miata is. How much more rigidity in percentage does this add? We have not done that math, so I can't answer that question. Excuse me. Seat of the pants, it is substantial. It makes a big difference. Here's a good one. Will these work with a V8 swapped car with a T56 trans? I can't answer that question. I can tell you that the likelihood of them working is much greater than with our V1 butterfly, which is, by the way, where the name came from, because these don't really make sense as a butterfly. Maybe this one a little bit, but so yeah, maybe. These have way more exhaust clearance, and they don't have a piece kind of in the middle. So the V8 swaps that we used to do have a brace for the back of the transmission that's, oh man, I can't remember, but something around here. So if it sits in here, very possibly. If you have your own setup that's attached to the tunnel, probably exhaust would be your biggest concern. The short version there is that as long as your exhaust does not dip below a line drawn between the two frame rails, then it should work. There are enough layers in that I am definitely not going to guarantee it, but that's a much higher likelihood than our old one. All right, when will you be offering a flat bottom kit for these? Possibly in the future. We don't have any plans for it at this time, just because, again, in our testing, the transmission tunnel got pretty hot. And it was more a passenger comfort kind of hot than a destroying things kind of hot. That said, we did basically stop our testing when we got to that point. So it wasn't very, very thorough testing, I suppose you could say. The provisions are there. If you want to experiment with it, go for it. If you figure anything out, let us know. Because basically, the current theory is you need to extract the air from the tunnel so that you're not overheating things, but you need to do that without messing up the aero end of things. So, okay, when will you have these for the NC or the ND? At this point, we don't have anything in the works for that. That may very well change in the future. So stay tuned, but no plans currently. Will the FM rear cannon brace cause any issues with installation? So the cannon brace goes here across the back surface of the rear subframe. And those are all the way up there. So no, zero issues whatsoever, totally unrelated. And they'll work fine together. They're addressing two different things. The cannon brace is much more specific to specific years than this guy is, but regardless, they're addressing two different things. The cannon brace is rigidity, stiffness of your rear subframe, and tendency of your lower control arm points to kind of move where they shouldn't. This one is the unibody, the chassis itself. So that is the list of ahead of time questions. We got no questions. None. All right. Well, easy enough. Well, there you go. New butterfly brace available now. Act fast. Supplies are running out. So, as always, thank you for stopping by. You guys, if you like this, comment, like, subscribe. If you have more questions, drop them in there. We'll get to them after the fact. If you have suggestions for videos, let us know. We are always looking for ideas. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for stopping by. We will see you next time.